the far corner of the dying galaxy, there was a planet once full of promise, but now forgotten in maps and memories. Long ago, it was a place where science bloomed and peaceful minds built shining cities that reached into the clouds. But peace is never safe in a wild universe, and one day the sky opened with fire as something dark and hungry fell upon the planet. That something was not a fleet or an army, it was worse, a swarm of twisted beasts born from failed experiments. Creatures that crawled out from secret labs buried under the earth. Things that once were animals or even people, but had become silent hunters who waited in shadows and tore through everything that breathed. Within days, the cities burned. The air was filled with smoke and screams, and the blue-skinned race that once called the planet home began to vanish. Rescue never came. Warnings were sent into space, but no one answered. The world was marked as dead. Years passed. Now the planet was nothing but ruins of glass and stone. Forests grew over metal. Streets were silent. The few satellites left spun in circles around the globe, whispering weak signals into the void. Most were broken beyond repair, but one still flickered to life whenever something moved below. And it was this faint signal that caught the attention of a lone scavenger ship passing through the edge of the star system. The ship belonged to a man named Adam. He wasn't a soldier or a hero, just a quiet human with a small craft, looking for old tech or salvageable cores to trade. He traveled alone, liked silence more than people, and rarely followed orders. When his ship's system blinked with the planet's weak distress ping, he almost ignored it. But then he saw the signal wasn't random. It repeated, slow and steady, like a heartbeat waiting to be heard. Against protocol, Adam changed course. He didn't tell the station or ask for backup. He just suited up, lowered his ship through the dense gray clouds of the ruined planet, and landed near the edge of a collapsed city where nature had eaten through glass towers and vines grew through broken steel. He walked with careful steps, his scanner held in one hand and his other hand resting near the small weapon at his belt. The place smelled like damp stone and rot. The scanner beeped. He followed it into what looked like an old shelter, a place meant to keep people safe during war or disaster. The entrance was half buried under rubble. He pushed through fallen panels and crouched under twisted beams. Something was alive in here. The scanner was sure of it. Inside the shelter, it was dark and heavy. Air barely moved. Rusted machines lined the walls. He moved slowly, scanning each shadow, each corner, each pile of broken things. Then he heard a sound, soft, like breathing. His steps paused. He turned toward the source, gently moved aside a metal sheet, and saw her. She was small. Maybe 8 or 9 if he guessed by her size, though her species was unknown to him. Her skin was pale blue and marked with fading lines that glowed faintly. She wore no shoes, just scraps of cloth. Her long hair was tangled and dirty. Her wide eyes locked onto his. She didn't scream, she didn't run. She just stared, frozen like a stone. Adam didn't move fast. He lowered himself to one knee, placed the scanner down, and slowly reached into his bag. From it, he took out a protein bar and some water. He didn't speak yet. Instead, he opened the bottle and placed it near her, then gently slid the food closer. Her eyes followed his hand. For a long minute, she did nothing. Then, slowly, her thin fingers reached out and grabbed the bottle. She drank fast, like someone who hadn't tasted clean water in days. She ate like someone who had almost forgotten what food felt like. When she finished, she looked back at him, not with fear, but something else, something closer to confusion, maybe even hope. Adam looked around. The shelter was barely standing. If it collapsed, she would die under it. And the signal, it must have been coming from an old emergency node still running in the wall. But no one had responded in years. She had been alone here, hiding in the dark while the world outside turned into a nest of monsters. He turned on his translator and tried speaking. The device repeated his words in several major alien dialects, but she didn't reply. Instead, she crawled forward slowly and grabbed his arm. She held it tight, trembling. She didn't know his name. She didn't understand his words, but she knew safety when she felt it. She had nothing left except the hand she was now holding from deep. Outside, a sound echoed through the ruins, long and low, like the growl of something massive passing between crumbling towers. Adam looked up. They were not alone on this planet. He knew what the file said. Mutated beasts, large and fast, bred in the dark to kill anything with heat or heartbeat. If one of them got a trace of movement, it would not stop. He turned to her and whispered with a calm voice that didn't match the danger around them. He said it softly, like a promise made in fire, "You're not alone anymore." She didn't understand the words, but the way he said them was enough. Her grip tightened, and together, they moved through the shadows, away from the broken shelter, deeper into a world where every step could be the last. But for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. They moved through the ruins slowly, one step at a time, careful not to make noise that could carry through the still air of the dead city. The tall buildings around them leaned like tired giants, and vines grew through every window and crack. Wind whispered through broken pipes, and metal creaked above them like the world itself was groaning in its sleep. Adam kept one hand near his weapon and the other close to the girl's shoulder. She walked beside him without a word, her bare feet silent on the cracked ground, her small frame always slightly behind his, like she was hiding in his shadow, though. She said nothing. Her eyes moved quickly from side to side, watching everything. Every sound made her flinch. Every gust of wind sent her head turning. She had learned to live in fear, and now it was the only rhythm her heart understood. Adam didn't speak either because he knew that words wouldn't help her right now. Safety wasn't something you said. It was something you proved. So he guided her through broken alleys and across collapsed roads. He climbed over fallen walls, with her beside him. When they heard the low roars in the distance, they froze together like one being and only moved again when the danger had passed. They found shelter in an old maintenance bay beneath what used to be a transport station. Inside it was quiet and cold, but dry. Adam checked every corner first and made sure no nest or movement was nearby. Then he built a small camp in the far corner using heat packs and emergency lights. The girl sat with her knees pulled to her chest, eyes never leaving the doorway. Adam handed her another protein bar and a blanket. She took both without question. Her hands shook, but she was no longer starving. She was simply afraid. He sat across from her with his back against the wall and pulled out a small transmitter from his bag. The signal from the shelter had triggered it earlier, and he was now trying to trace if anyone else had ever responded. But the screen showed nothing, no replies. No human presence anywhere near this part of space. The girl's people were gone. Her family, her home, everything she had known had turned to dust. Adam looked at her then, and for the first time he asked himself why she was still alive. How had a child survived in a place like this for so long without weapons or protection? Maybe she had hidden every day deep in dark corners while the monsters roamed above. Maybe luck had favored her, or maybe the creatures didn't hunt all the time. But she was still here, thin but breathing, scared but still fighting in her own way. She had outlived her world, and now she was watching him as if he were her only. Hope left. He switched on the translator again and spoke slowly using simple words. His voice was soft without command. He said he was going to get her off this planet. He said they would leave together. The device repeated it in several languages, and she watched it closely. After a pause, she reached into the small pouch at her waist and pulled out something round and flat, like a stone with glowing marks. She pressed it gently, and a light formed above it, showing a tiny figure of her. Around it were images of others of her kind. Smiling faces, a tall woman, a man, with strong shoulders. A small boy who looked like her brother, maybe. Then fire filled the projection. Creatures swarmed. People screamed. She tapped the stone and the light vanished. Her face showed nothing but her hands, closed tight around the stone as if it was the only piece of her world she had left. Adam nodded slowly. He understood more from that one gesture than from any translator. She had no one. She had lost everything. She had seen too much and remembered too much. But now she had him. In the morning they moved again. The old map showed that a beacon tower stood several kilometers east beyond the city walls. If Adam could reach it, he could send a high signal straight to orbit. Maybe someone would hear. Maybe someone would respond. Maybe Earth Command or an outpost ship would pick it up and come. It was a chance, and one they had to take. As they walked through an abandoned factory district, they passed rows of broken machines that once shaped parts for starships. Now rust and dust covered everything. In one of the old rooms, the girl paused and touched a shattered picture frame lying on the ground. The glass had cracked, but the photo inside was still visible. It showed a group of workers smiling in uniforms. She stared at it for a moment, then turned away. No words, just silence. Later, they heard a strange sound echoing between the walls. Not a growl or a roar, but something faster, like claws tapping across steel. Adam motioned for her to hide behind a pile of crates. He crouched nearby, his weapon ready. The sound grew louder, then faded, then returned. Something was moving ahead of them, but it was not coming closer. It was circling, searching, hunting. Adam waited for a long while until the noise vanished. Then he gave a quiet signal, and they moved again, more quickly now, with tension tight in the air. That night they rested in a collapsed tunnel, lit by dim red lights from Adam's bag. The girl curled up near him, her small body wrapped in the blanket. For the first time since he found her, she slept deeply, without jerking awake. Adam sat awake most of the night, watching the dark for any sign of movement. He thought about all the things she would never get back, and all the things he had to do to keep her safe now. He didn't know her name. She didn't know his. But something stronger than names was forming between them in the early hours before. Sunrise, she woke up slowly, looked around, saw that he was still there, and gave a tiny nod, almost like a thank you. Then she leaned her head against his side, not fully, but just enough to show that she trusted him. And as he looked down at her, he whispered those words again, not to comfort her this time, but to remind himself of what he had promised. You're not alone anymore. The sky above the ruined city began to change as they moved eastward through the broken land. The clouds that once hung heavy and dark began to scatter, and soft rays of pale sunlight fell through the cracks in the atmosphere. The girl tilted her head up toward the light, as if she had forgotten what the sun felt like. Her eyes squinted, but she didn't turn away. For a moment she stood still in the open street and let the warmth touch her face. Adam paused too. He didn't say anything. He just watched her, and for that small moment, there was no fear in her expression, only quiet wonder, like a memory had returned to her. Without warning, but peace never lasted long on this world. A loud thud echoed across the broken rooftops, then another followed, like something large was moving above them. Something heavy with claws that scraped across metal. Adam quickly grabbed her hand and pulled her into the side alley behind a half-destroyed building. He pressed his back against the wall and looked up, scanning the shadows. The girl crouched behind him, her small hand gripping his jacket tight. Whatever was out there, it was hunting, and it had caught a scent or a sound or a sound. Adam knew they had to move, but one wrong step would draw the thing closer. Growling started low and slow, and it was followed by a deep rumble, like a growl, mixed with breathing, like the sound of a furnace being fed with air. The girl froze completely, and Adam could feel her trembling behind him. He reached into his side pouch and pulled out a small reflective sphere. It was an old decoy device used to distract hostile creatures. He pressed the trigger and tossed. it across the alley. It hit a metal pipe and rolled into the open street before releasing a sharp pulse of sound and light. The creature above roared and lunged in the direction of the sphere, crashing through a collapsed walkway and vanishing from their view. Without a word, Adam grabbed her, and they ran, weaving between buildings and ducking under fallen beams. The city had turned into a maze of danger where every shadow held a threat, and every turn could be a trap after what felt like hours of running. They reached an old building that looked like a hospital or a lab. Its walls were cracked and covered in vines, but the main structure still stood. Inside it was dark but calm. No signs of movement, no fresh tracks. Adam sealed the entrance behind them, using an old door mechanism still connected to the backup power. They moved deeper into the building and found a small room lined with medical tables and glass cabinets now shattered and empty. There was a bench in the corner, and Adam lowered himself onto it, his breath heavy and his back aching. The girl stood beside him, her hand still holding his arm. She looked at the scrapes on his shoulder, the thin cuts on his hands, the tired look in his eyes. Then, without speaking, she pulled out a small bottle from one of the old medical kits nearby. It had a symbol he didn't recognize, but when she opened it, the smell was clean and sharp like antiseptic. She gently touched the cloth to his arm, cleaning the wound. Adam watched her in silence, surprised by how careful and focused she was. This wasn't the first time she had done this. She had survived because she had learned. After she finished, she looked up at him with those wide silver blue eyes and gave the smallest nod of approval, like she was telling him he would be okay. Adam smiled slightly and leaned back against the wall, letting the tension drain from his body. For a while they sat there quietly. He took out a thin ration and broke it in half, offering her a piece. She took it and chewed slowly, her eyes still moving around the room, making sure they were alone. Then she reached into her small bag and pulled out the glowing stone again. She touched it, and the light appeared once more, showing those same images of her family and her home. This time she didn't stop the image. She let it play longer, and Adam saw something new. He saw a figure in a lab coat lifting her as a child, spinning her in the air, while others clapped and laughed. Then the image shifted to fire and screams and monsters dragging people away. She touched the figure in the coat and looked at Adam, as if asking something. He understood. She was looking for someone. Maybe her father or a guardian, someone who had saved her once before, and now she wanted to know if Adam could do the same. He pointed at himself and then at the sky and nodded. Slowly. She didn't smile, but she closed the image and put it away gently, like she had found enough hope for now. That night they slept in turns. Adam took the first watch. The building creaked around them, but no threats came. The girl curled up beside the old cabinet, her arms wrapped around her knees. Adam watched her breathe slowly in her sleep, and he knew he couldn't fail her. She had trusted him without knowing who he was. She had followed him through hell without needing a reason. Now he had to keep going, not for the mission, not for orders, but because she had no one else in. The morning they left the building and made their way toward the beacon tower. It stood far on a hill beyond the outer wall of the city, where the ruins gave way to a forest of black trees. The path was not safe, but it was the only way. As they walked, Adam noticed that she stayed closer to him, now not out of fear, but something else, like she had started to believe that the world might not end as long as she walked beside him. They reached the base of the hill just before nightfall. The tower was tall and bent slightly, like time had tried to pull it down but failed. Adam could see the panels were still in place, and the beacon light was dim but working. If he could reach the main console, he could send a direct signal to orbit. But as they climbed the hill, something moved in the trees below. Not one thing, but many, shapes shifting between branches, eyes glowing in the shadows. The creatures had followed them. Adam turned and drew his weapon. The girl looked up at him, not with panic but with understanding. They had reached the final Stretch, and now they would have to fight for it. She stepped closer to him without a word and gripped the edge of his jacket. She would not run. She would not hide. She would stay with him until the end, and in that moment, something inside her changed. Hill was steep and covered in thick roots that twisted like veins across the ground. Adam climbed carefully, testing each step while keeping his eyes on the path ahead. The girl followed close behind, her small hands grabbing roots and rocks to steady herself. Above them, the beacon tower rose into the sky, its metal sides worn, and its lights flickering dimly like a tired heartbeat. The wind grew stronger as they reached the halfway point, pushing against them, carrying with it a strange smell like ash and wet earth. It was the scent of danger below. In the trees, shadows moved with silent purpose. The creatures that had hunted this world for years were now closing in. They had tasted the scent of life again and would not let it escape so easily. Adam paused at a ledge and looked down. He saw flickers of movement, a flash of claws against bark, glowing eyes watching from under the leaves. He turned to the girl and pointed up. She nodded without question. Her fear was still there, but something else had grown beside it, now something stronger. They reached the top of the hill, just as the sky began to darken again. Storm clouds gathered above, as if the planet itself was warning them that time was short. The entrance to the tower was blocked by debris, metal panels, and thick vines wrapped around it like the forest was trying to pull it back into the earth. Adam pulled out his knife and began cutting through the vines. The girl helped, pulling away the loose pieces until the door opened with a loud creak. Inside, the air was stale and filled with dust, but the structure still stood. They entered quickly, and Adam locked the door behind them, using a manual latch. The walls inside were lined with dead screens and broken consoles, but at the far end of the room, a small panel blinked with weak light. It was the heart of the tower, the emergency broadcast system. If he could repair it just enough to send one clear signal, maybe someone would hear it. Maybe a patrol ship or a trade vessel or even a deep-range outpost would pick it up. He set his bag down and began working with quick hands tools, moving wires sparking in the dark. Girl stood near the window watching the forest below. Her eyes scanned the trees, and her breath was calm, like she was waiting for something. She knew they were not safe yet. She could feel them gathering. The monsters were not just beasts, they were watchers. They remembered they hunted like wolves. With patience, one of them moved into the clearing at the base of the hill, a large one with a body built from twisted bone and dark scales. Its mouth split across the center of its face with rows of teeth that never stopped moving. It stood silent, then looked up at the tower inside. Adam finished reconnecting a power line, and the console flickered to life. The screen glowed bright, and a humming sound filled the room. He tapped the keys one by one, sending out a coded pulse, repeating it across channels. The system was slow, but it worked. A signal now reached beyond the clouds, climbing into space, carrying one clear message of distress and coordinates. He stepped back and let out a breath of relief. It was done. Now they just had to wait. But there was no time left. A deep roar shook. The ground in the tower trembled. The monsters had begun their climb. From every direction they came, crawling, leaping, clawing their way up the hill, their bodies moving in strange angles, their eyes glowing with hunger. The tower door buckled under pressure as something slammed into it again and again. Adam raised his weapon and stood between the door and the girl. She watched him quietly, then stepped forward, standing beside him, not behind him. He looked at her, confused, and said she should hide, but she shook her head. Her eyes began to glow faintly, like the lines on her skin had woken up. She held out her hand and closed her eyes. A pulse of energy rippled from her chest outward, filling the room with a soft hum. Adam felt the air change, like static before a storm. The girl opened her eyes, and for a moment they were filled with light, not fire, not heat, but something pure, something ancient. When the monsters broke through the door, they rushed forward with open jaws, but the girl stepped ahead of Adam and raised her hand. The energy around her surged outward, forming a wave that struck the creatures and knocked them back without burning them, without killing, just pushing them away, with a force that came not from hate, but from something else entirely. The creatures screamed and scrambled trying to reach them, but her power held them back. Adam watched in awe as she stood tall, her small frame glowing, her voice silent, but her will unshaken. She wasn't fighting to win, she was protecting what mattered. The monsters continued to press forward, but her energy held strong. She began to shake her legs, trembling, her arms losing strength. Adam rushed forward and caught her before she fell. He looked down at her and saw the light fading from her skin. She had used too much. She had given everything she had to keep them safe. He carried her to the bench and wrapped her in the blanket. Her breathing was shallow but steady. She looked up at him and managed a weak smile. He held her hand and told her that help was coming. The signal had been sent. They had made it this far. Now they just had to wait a little longer. Outside, the monsters had stopped. They stood at the edge of the clearing, staring up at the tower as if unsure what to do. Her power had not destroyed them, but it had changed something. They could feel it. They sensed something old, something sacred, that they could not touch. For now they waited. They did not climb again. Inside the tower, Adam watched the beacon light blink slowly above the console. A signal light began to pulse from the corner of the screen. It was faint but real. Someone had received the message. A ship was on its way. Rescue was coming. He turned to the girl and told her softly that they were going home. She closed her eyes and let herself rest, her hand still holding his. And for the first time since they had landed on that cursed world, Adam let himself believe that everything was going to be all right. He looked out the window at the monsters below, still waiting, still watching, but not moving. They had no power over him now, not while she was with him. Not while her light still lingered in the air, and as the night passed and the stars above began to shift, Adam stayed awake beside her, ready to protect her until the end, or until the new beginning arrived. Stars above the broken planet began to shift as the sun crept once more toward the edge of the sky. The storm clouds that had gathered the night before were gone, and in their place came silence and soft wind moving through the trees, like a whisper that carried the weight of the long night. The tower still stood, its signal still flashing, a slow, steady rhythm that reached out into the dark sky again and again, like a voice calling for help and not giving up even when there was no answer. Adam sat near the girl who still lay wrapped in the blanket, her breathing shallow but calm, her eyes closed in quiet sleep, and her small hand resting in his palm. He had not moved from her side. He had stayed awake the whole night, watching the shadows, watching the door, listening for the sounds of the monsters, but none of them came. The creatures had remained still, gathered at the edge of the clearing, but no longer climbing, no longer attacking. Something had changed in them, or perhaps in the world around them. Adam did not try to understand it. All he knew was that the girl had saved them, not by destroying the enemy, but by standing with courage in a place where nothing else had survived. And now as he sat there, he waited not for a miracle, but for the signal to bring them a way out. The console screen blinked softly. The incoming transmission alert had grown stronger. A message had been received. A ship was coming. As the morning light grew brighter, a low hum began to rise from above the clouds. Adam stood and stepped toward the window. At first he saw nothing, then through the distant sky a shape began to appear, the sharp silhouette of a human transport vessel cutting through the mist and moving toward the hill. Its engines roared gently, and its lights blinked as it circled once above the tower, then slowly lowered to the clearing at the base of the hill. The monsters backed away, not running, just moving into the trees, as if the arrival of something foreign, something from outside their world, was enough to make them retreat. Adam turned back to the girl and gently shook her shoulder. Her eyes opened slowly, and for a second she seemed lost, but then her gaze found him, and she remembered. He smiled and told her they were going home. She didn't answer with words, but her eyes grew wet with relief. He lifted her, carefully holding her close against his chest as he stepped out of the tower and walked down the path through the quiet forest toward the waiting ship. The transport's side ramp opened with a hiss, and a team of medics stepped out, weapons ready, but their eyes wide with disbelief as they saw Adam carrying the small alien girl in his arms. The captain asked who she was, and Adam replied that she was the reason he survived, that she was the only one left on this world, and she needed protection, not questions, not fear, just safety. The crew hesitated, but something in Adam's voice, something in the way he stood, made them step aside. He walked up the ramp and into the ship without looking back. Inside the med bay, the girl was placed on a soft bed and attached to monitoring systems. The crew scanned her vitals and found strange readings, energy patterns that made no sense, but one thing was clear: she was alive, stable, and recovering. Adam stood beside her as the ship lifted into the sky and the ground below slowly faded from view. The world of monsters, the ruins, the shadows, all fell behind them. The beacon tower grew smaller until it disappeared in the clouds. They were finally leaving. In the days that followed aboard the ship, the girl grew stronger. She began to eat again and sit up on her own. She didn't speak much, but she watched everything with quiet curiosity. The crew gave her soft clothes and toys from storage. She held on to her glowing stone, always keeping it near her heart. One night she walked into the observation deck, where Adam sat alone looking at the stars. She climbed into the seat beside him and looked up at the sky full of new light. He looked at her and said that soon they would reach a human colony, where she would be safe, where people would care for her and give her a chance to live without fear. She didn't answer right away, but then she placed her hand on his arm and for the first time spoke clearly in his language. Her voice was quiet but firm. She said one sentence, and it carried all the meaning in the world: "I want to stay with you." Adam was silent for a moment, unsure what to say. He had expected her to find a new home among others, maybe even her own kind, if any had survived somewhere, but now she was telling him that her home was wherever he was. He nodded slowly and said that she could stay as long as she wanted that. They had come too far together to part now. When the ship landed at the human outpost, they were greeted by officials and medics and curious watchers. Adam gave his full report, told them everything about the planet, the monsters, the beacon tower, and the girl's power. There were questions, investigations, tests, but through it all he stayed beside her, and she stayed beside him. Eventually the higher command gave approval for her to be placed under Adam's care, not as a subject, not as a mission, but as family. Years passed. The girl grew taller, her voice stronger, her steps more confident. She learned languages, systems, history. She worked beside Adam on missions across colonies, helping where she could, and always remembered what it meant to be alone and what it meant to be found. People called her gifted, some called her strange, but those who met her never forgot the calm in her eyes or the quiet strength she carried, like a flame that could not be stolen. One evening, as they stood together at the edge of a quiet world watching the new sunset, Adam asked her if she ever thought about that planet, the place where he found her. She nodded slowly and said that she remembered the monsters, the ruins, the cold nights. But most of all she remembered one voice, one promise spoken in the dark when all hope was gone. "You were not alone anymore." She looked at him and smiled, and this time he smiled back, without pain, without fear, without weight, because now he wasn't alone either. The end.